So hi, everyone. Let's get started. I don't know if they'll close the door or not. So my name is Claude Rémiard. I'm the Group Program Manager for Azure DevTest Labs and actually also a Azure DevOps Integration. So what we're going to talk about today is talk about how we can use Azure to support a dev lifecycle with kind of a focus on the infrastructure side that we can use for the dev with Azure DevTest Labs. So that's kind of the product I'm working on. Before I get much more in details, I just wanted to know maybe a little bit about yourself in the sense of who in the room is from the IT side of the house? About, well, more than, all right. And who's from the dev side of the house? That seems to be equal. Actually, that seems to be more than 2/2. So there's, and that's a good thing. Means there might some DevOps people as well. All right, okay. And who's working primarily with Linux? A few. All right, okay. So basically, we do both Linux and Windows, but I'll focus more my example on Windows. So, and who already knows about DevTest Labs? Who's already tried it, looked at it, seen me demo it before or whatnot? Just a few. Okay. So I'll cover it fairly overall. All right. So when we think about basically why we build Azure DevTest Labs, it's really based on the constraints of doing dev test in the cloud. So a lot of the drivers to go to the cloud is, can go fast, you get elasticity, you can do more agile development, you can get environment faster. But basically, there's always a concern of, security about it, the networking around that, and compliance, performance, and so on and so forth. So what we tried to do with the idea of Lab is to try and solve these problems. One other thing also we see, and that's interesting data from on-prem dev environment and test environments, that 65% of the developers say it's too long and too complicated to get a new dev environment. I've visited a lot of customers in the last year. And it's not rare that it's 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks you start a new project, you need a new dev and test environment, a perf environment, and it takes a long time to get it. Once you get it, you need to finish setting it up and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of time and effort that is spent there. So what tends to happen is a lot of people then start hoarding them. They're adding them once they have environment, they don't let them go, and you have kind of these massive quantities of VMs that nobody really knows what to do with. Nobody wants to delete them, and they're kind of off, not used much. So that actually 10% of the VMs for dev and test or the infrastructure is actually used on a regular basis, which is kind of very, very low. And we've seen that in many cases. So the whole idea that we're trying to solve, and there's a kind of perspective there, is really to create this idea of the DevTest Lab. So we think about it, it's a subset of Azure. So we want to get on Azure, create an environment on Azure, and let the devs get what they need when they need it. So from the dev side, the idea is to say, you need an environment. We're trying to make sure you can get the environment you need, either a dev box or a test environment, in minutes, not in days or weeks or hours, in minutes. That's kind of our goal. On the other hand, we need to do it in a way that, what we heard a lot of cases is without breaking the bank. So you can create all the environments you want, but they need to be managed. They need to be done in a way that, we won't have a waste. It's a bit different when you have a sunk cost internally, you have all the servers already, and whether you're optimizing them or not, versus if you pay per minute you're using. So it changes the game once we get to the cloud. So our idea there is to say, well, we're going to create that sandbox. So you can go to Azure. Everything we do in a lab, you can do in Azure. So we spin up VM and environment. We're not inventing any of that. That already exists in standard Azure. What we're doing is to say, well, for this team or that group or that division, we're creating this lab. And in this lab, we're setting some rules on how to work, some quotas, some targets, and whatnot, so that then basically we can let the dev just go and run with it. So we're confident that they're working in a certain size of spending so that they won't be able to go beyond that. And then kind of the mindset we have is to give the devs what they need to optimize their own usage. We're finding that if they have the right tools and it makes sense, devs will be more than happy to not waste any money either. It's just that if it's, you know, I've heard a few devs tell me that is the most expensive thing in the whole equation is really the dev time when you think about it, more than the infrastructure. So if it's too hard, too costly, then, you know, they won't do it, they'll just let it go. So our goal, what we're trying to achieve is basically have the dev and IT work together. IT provide labs for the devs to work in and give them like a great service. The devs go in, they like what they have, and then we have that under control. So that's the whole mindset. We call it like a controlled self-service or kind of this concept. So we do it with like there's four really value props. So the first one is what we call the worry-free self-service. So it's really this idea of setting that sandbox. The other thing that we're trying to do is make it easy for devs to get what they need fast. And what we're doing there is that setting up environment is not the easiest thing. You have networking, you have multiple bits, you have versioning in there, you have all kind of complexities. So our principle in the dev team is to do a bit like you do, let's say, with a build script. Somebody on the team writes a build script, and then everybody just builds their code. Not everybody needs to be a build expert, and you don't need to, you know, change your build script every time you want to compile your code. So it's the same idea. So we have a lot of feature around capturing repeatable templates so that, you know, once we say, yeah, this is the dev box we use in the team, or this is this for this type of test, we capture it, and then when we reuse them to create fast. So you can go and you can go very quickly and get them without, you know, every time having tons of expertise on the Azure infrastructure side. In the better teams, we see a lot of collaboration between dev and IT on that, where basically those templates are kind of built together. The idea of sharing template, again, is kind of, so the templates are good to get it fast, but also we have this structure of saying, yeah, we can share a template for my team, and also share templates across teams or at the organizational level. So the idea, we have 3-4 different ways of doing that, but the key is that we're thinking everything about sharing everything. And our strategy there is very simple. You see that in the demos. We're looking at source control as the base, the single source of truth. We have a lot of ways to manage multiple versions, and you can decide who can go on which branch, do what. And then I've pulled requests from the dev side, from the the database guys, the IT guys, or if it's a DevOps team, then everybody goes directly in their branch. And the last thing we're trying to do, and I'll show a scenario on that, is really to integrate with the tool chain, more thinking about the delivery pipeline. So normally when you set an automated pipeline to go to production, you will use some release management system, for example, Visual Studio Release Management, or Spinnaker more on the Linux side, or Jenkins has one, and so on and so forth, that basically you build your code, you put it in a test environment. If it's all good, you go to the next one, you run further tests, and then you go staging and prod. In that context, we see Lab as a subcontractor to your pipeline. So in your pipeline, what you want to do is say, you know, if I can define my environment through files and reusable things, then I can have a version from prod, and I can have my test environment to look a lot like prod. Maybe less servers, less things and whatnot, but the same principle, and also using the same mechanism to do my deployment, which is the key there. So in that context, we see the lab. You can go directly to Azure. Probably you'll go to Azure for prod, but in your dev and test environment, you can go to the dev and test service instead of going directly to prod. Again, because, you know, we'll control the context in there and put some policies and some automations. So we have kind of a few scenarios. I'll demo 3, but what we see customer doing. So we GA'd this summer. We've been out for about a year publicly, a little less than that. And now we have, you know, thousands of customers, and we see a lot of patterns emerging, which is kind of interesting. So the first pattern we have is one we started with. We do that internally. We have a few large, actually fairly large customer in the thousands of developers, where basically we're doing the dev box in the cloud. So the idea is that for me as a developer, I want to have the dev environment. I have a regular box on my desk, and instead of having different one for different environments, I just RDP or SSH into a VM that lives on Azure. I need a new one, I create it. I need an environment where I just want to push my code and do we call it the inner cycle for development, but basically the inner loop. So you can just push your code, test it, see what it looks like, and when everything's okay, you push it to the main branch, and then your pipeline goes. So that's kind of a core scenario. We see in that scenario also reasons are teams in multiple regions. One of our largest customers is actually they're using a lot of subcontractors. So they create those dev boxes so they know that subcontractor A, B, and C use the same SDKs and so on and so forth because they create kind of the golden image that everybody's using, so it integrates better. We see that with, between Europe and US and India, for example, where they spin up VMs so that everybody works with the same thing. So that I'll use as my main scenario to show kind of the basic of creating everything. And then I'll get into the test my app / pipeline scenario as one. And then I'll move into the other case. So the test my app is really the scenario I was talking about, where you create test environments, you push your code on it. They might be a little more complex, either on demand or as part of an automated pipeline. Personally, I think as part of an automated pipeline should be where you want to go. So that basically every time you do a check-in, you kick a pipeline and you try to go to prod. But if you want to go and set up a manual environment to do some manual testing, then again, that scenario is supported in there. And the last case we see is more, actually, we did not build for that originally, but we got a lot of customer feedback and we responded to it, is for training. Actually, our biggest customer is a university. So people set up a lab, they set up very simple templates, and then students come in and basically they have IT courses or the courses that I've done on a computer. They just load it up so the user comes in and runs the course for the day, and then you get rid of the VM. So that's a very efficient way to do that. And I'll kind of show all the features. You guys will get a good sense of that. So the first scenario is that dev box in the cloud. So we have a few concepts in there, but the idea is that you basically start and from a kind of a formula or pre-done template that you want to use, you go and you get a lab VM. So again, the difference of a lab VM than a regular Azure VM is the VM is in the lab. That's pretty much the only difference. Being in the lab means the policies also will apply to it. So when you create a VM, you kind of go at it pretty much like building a cake. And I realize after the lunch we had that it's not, it's maybe a bit of a cruel slide, but but usually basically you build it as a case. You pick a base OS, so I'm starting with Linux, Ubuntu, whatnot, which version of Windows. And then usually you add a layer of tools on top of that. So your database server, SQL, or some tools like Visual Studio or your Java IDE or whatnot, basically. And then you put your own bits on it, the thing that you're working on and you're developing. So we see kind of that pattern very consistently. And in creating environment, what we see is why that becomes important specifically on Azure is that the base, if you can use the base as an Azure image as your starting point, those spin up quickly. Those are available everywhere, and it helps to go very fast. The tools don't change often. The tool is not something that every day you're going to have to change. Your bits will. So often what we see is the tools, you can kind of start with your base, add the tools, and actually save that as an image, and then install what you need every day. So there's always a distinction of, do you want to refresh your VMs or recreate VMs versus, and when you create them, do you want to be based on a base image or build it every time? So for example, in our case, let's say if I take Microsoft internally, installing, start with a VM, install Visual Studio, install SQL, that's a long time. So if we bake that into an image, and then what we do is we just add, let's say, the SDK we're working on, then now it becomes a 3, 4, 5 minutes, get the first VM, and then a few minutes to install the rest, and 10, 15 minutes, you're up and going. So that's the idea. So you'll see that concept coming up when I create VMs. Is really, there's always a bit of a choice, and we've built that into our logic. So I'll just go to the base demo of using Lab. All right. So here I'm on on my Azure dashboard. So I have a number of labs. So again, the idea of a lab is it's an area for a team to work on, smaller or bigger team, but where they have common images, common policies, and so on and so forth. So actually, I'm going to go into this one is our team's live lab. So this is not test data. This is actually real data, a real operating lab. So in there, when I get in there, I have my two VMs on that lab. So I have this one and this one. Actually, Skeptic is, I'm the PM. So often when we finish a story, it comes to me and I'm the one who needs to validate that it works as it was supposed to. And I'm very skeptical on everything up until proven. So I'm the skeptic of the team. So the idea there is that once you have a VM, you can go and actually just start your VM, connect to it. You can delete it and so on and so forth. It's already stopped. Or you can say, all right, I'm going to go and create a new VM. So I'll just go over how we create a VM in the team. So I just went at the top and asked for a new VM. So it's going to allow a number of options for me to go in there. That's a little slow here. So it's there. And basically, we have kind of three ways of looking at it. So now let's think about the layers. The first one, we call those formulas. It's the whole cake. Everything's saved. All the answers to everything we have on that machine is there. So I can go and just create a VM with that. These guys here, those are images. So think about probably the first two layers together. I can start with that and decide to pick and choose what I want to add on top of it. Or I can start with a base VM from the Azure Marketplace. So we just show them there, and basically from there you can pick some of those. So I'll just go with, I'll pick this guy. So it's a Windows VM. So I just need to give it a name. So you'll quickly notice that I have absolutely no imagination for a name or anything. It's like, so username, get a guess, all right. And then a password. So that's pretty much all you have to enter. And then from there, did I do something wrong? All right, now I'm good. And then from there, I can what do I need to pick in there as well? I have the machine size that I need to do. Oh, and here I need to configure which virtual network I want to go in. Sorry about that. So here I'm going to take these guys. So talk about it. The idea of the virtual network is important, and I'll talk about it now, and we'll come back to it. But the virtual network is basically when you set up a lab, you can say this lab, when we create stuff, it's going to be in this or that virtual network, so that the developer, in this case, I have one choice or two, so you can preset. One of the key things in that choice, why we made the association kind of formal in every lab, is that you can actually say, well, I'm going to take a virtual network which has an ExpressRoute connection, so that you can actually decide if you want to pick a VM that will be connected to your on-prem network or that is just in the cloud. In that setting also, when you set up the VNets, you can limit public IPs or private IPs. So that it's in the more the admin side of things. But basically, as a user, I'd go just here and basically just go and create my VM. If you look in there, I picked the whole cake, right, including the last thing. So if I look at what the cake actually included in there, we have this concept of artifacts. Artifacts are little pieces of software and or little script that we want to run on a VM at creation. So in this case, if you look, we already have 9 artifacts selected. So I didn't do that. Somebody smarter than me on the team figured out everything we need. We agreed on these are the tools we need. And then from there, basically, when I create the VM, I'll get Notepad, Fiddler, Visual Studio Code. The image we started was already with Windows and Visual Studio. So we're adding those. And then we're adding a bunch of chocolatey packages. Some of them, so that's a generic install here. Let's say that this guy goes and will install, for example, PushGit part. That's a tool we're using. And we just go to the public chocolatey, take it down and use it. So those were pre-selected by part of my formula to start it. If I want to add something else to that list, I can actually just go and say, yeah, and I also want 7-zip for some reason. So I'm going to add 7-zip to it, and I'm going to have 10 artifacts, and at creation, then it's going to add all of these things. So it makes it very easy for the dev team to say, I want this base, and let me add tools that we have. Where this principle works nicely is that these additional software we add on, actually we're pointing to a source control repository, and you can add your own. So it's fully open source, and you can basically just clone the repo, make it your own, and then you can add your own pieces of software in there. Let's say your app, my accounting app, backend, my front end, and whatnot. You just add them in that list here once. Somebody basically creates a little JSON file, I'll show it, that says, go get our bits there at that where our build drops them, and then install them using that PowerShell or that bash script that usually is dropped from the same place. So that basically you can just add your own thing. So it becomes very easy for a developer just to either pick a formula or just add tools that you need. So it makes it very, again, very easy. And then everybody works with the same thing. Nobody needs to deal with rescripting all of that or installing it manually at creation. Those will be installed. All right, so I'll just go OK. I might be missing some parameters on the artifacts, but so that's the principle. I won't create it because it will take a few minutes. Instead, I'll go with another option. So again, as we're saying, another option is to start with just an image. So again, the principle of the image, it doesn't have the formula. So the formula has the parameters and answers to parameters and all kinds of pre-installed artifacts. The base image, in this case, I'm just starting with an image that we save with no artifact selected, and then you can go and start from them. So you're starting with the second layer, or you can start with the first layer. I think that's kind of the idea there. And then you can eat your cake and have it too. No, I'm not sure. I'm not sure this one works. All right. So that's the main kind of way to go and get a VM. What's interesting also is that those images, we have APIs and PowerShell commandlets that you can actually go and create them automatically. So for example, what we do internally, and I'll show an example from a customer. We just run a script at night on a schedule, and we go get the divisional build from the last night, and we recreate our images, put them in the lab. So the next day, you can go and say, all right, give me a VM with everything installed, including everything the other 3,000 people in the division has worked on yesterday. So it makes it very practical. And again, it's just a couple of minutes. You get a VM with everything you need, and you can get going. So that's how to get from the developer side how to go and get the VM. From the IT side, when you look at it a little more, and for example, so I was looking at my VM. I can see also from my team all the other VMs that are there. So people create VMs. They might create them with, if they share the, if they're common VMs, we can go and remote desktop into them. So I can see basically all the VMs of the team there. And there's a role. So we have two roles in lab, a lab user role and a lab admin role. So the lab user sees only his VMs, and lab admin can see everybody's VM and actually work on them, start them, shut them. As a lab user, I can see the other VM, but I cannot manage them. All right. The other thing we can set in there is what we call the policy settings. So in the policy, again, that's a lab owner only feature. So here I can go and say, all right, when we pick the VM, and I'll show that later on, but when you create a VM, you can say, in this lab, these are the only sizes available. So we for example, here I can say, all right, we do DS2s, DS3s, and DS4. So there's no risk that somebody's going to go and create a Godzilla G-series machine or whatnot and forget it for the weekend and burn our budget over that. So the idea is that we're limiting that. Just that one policy limits the envelope of what you can go and create. So often there's an initial discussion on this makes sense in the lab. That's what we require, what we see with the customer. There's a conversation, and then we agree, all right, this is the right bang for the buck for us in terms of environment that we need. Then the next thing you can set is max VM per user. So you say, all right, these users, this is the number of VMs that they can have in this lab. So in our case, it's fairly high, 45, but it could be 5, 2, 7, whatever. We'll see in the training scenario often, or people might just put 1. So you can have 1 at a time, and that's that. So we'll prevent adding any more. Again, so the size of machine times the max number of machine gives you already a max spending you're able to do in there. We also have a person. We have also for the whole lab. So you can say for this lab, this is the max at a time. So often teams have common VMs and whatnot. And the whole mindset there is really to put we think about it as a net or whatnot. It's not to, it's just to give a tool as the dev team themselves. They can self-police on these things. They kind of go, this is the max we should have. Ideally, you give them responsibility for the spending, and then they have that as a tool to make sure that they keep honest. What we've seen a lot happening is that if you give too many VMs, then they'll keep a bunch of VMs behind that they don't really know. But if they're limited to 2 or 3, then they're going to go, do I really need this one? Or they'll go rebuy environment they really need. And the older VMs, then they don't exist. You just destroy them. Remember, creating them through a formula or an image really takes a few minutes, and then it spins up, and you don't have to reconfigure. You don't need to install anything. So killing a VM is not a big deal anymore. Right? You can destroy it and then restart it. Recreate it and then restart it. The other one, that's our probably most used feature policy. It's like on pretty much every lab. It is auto shutdown. So you can set for the lab a shutdown time where basically we're going to create an auto shutdown automatically. So that, in our case, for example, 7 p.m., we start shutting down VMs. And so that we don't pay for it overnight. You can put a start time in the morning. We don't. So when they come in, the first thing, they go to the main blade and they start their VM. You can pin VMs, you can pin labs to your dashboard. So what a lot of devs do is they pin their VM to the dashboard. You just click on it and RDP into it, and they get it going, and a few minutes they're up in the morning. But we don't pay overnight. We had some requests and some cases where you're in the VM, you stay longer, and you kind of go, oh, well, the system is shutting down the VM on me and I wasn't done, or I didn't save it. So we added a few features around that, and I'll show a quick example. But basically, you can set a notification on that. And that's if you want to have notifications. So 15 minutes before we go on the VM, we send you you can set a webhook. You can set an email. We use, a lot of customers use the new Logic apps on Azure, which basically is a little serverless app where you can go and send emails. Or you can use a Slack or the tools like this, or send an email to your phone or a notification, hey, you're about to be shut down. So that basically, you can finish the work. And when we send the notification, and I'll go back here, I think, yeah, I've put it here. Basically, that's an example I got last night, actually, which basically says, yeah, your VM in this lab is about to be shut down. And then you have the choice to say, yeah, forget it, postpone an hour, postpone 2 hours, or don't do it, and then it's going to go just the next day. So it's a choice every user has to skip or not. Any questions on that so far? I'm fine taking a few questions. Does it all make sense to you guys? All right. Any questions on this so far? All right, so I'll continue. Yes? Yes, so the question is, the artifacts, they're defined by a JSON file. Will you show that later? Actually, I'll do it now if you want. Like, yes?
Another question is, if the environment's fairly complicated, including provisioning SQL servers, data
right.
Is all that supported?
So that's a great question. I'll reserve the right to answer it in 5 minutes. So the question is, if it's a more complex environment with many things, you know, a SQL Server backend and whatnot, can you do something for it? So right now we would say, well, you know, call a script that calls lab with 3 VMs separately, but we're changing that. So I'll show it a little later. It's not shipped yet, so that's kind of something we're announcing today, but we're going to have the ability to spin up complex environment in one go. I'll show kind of they're the dev bits, so hopefully it's going to work properly. It's supposed to ship probably next week. So I'll just go back into the app. So we were talking about the artifacts themselves. So the way we think about it is when you create a lab, you actually point the lab to a source control repo where the artifacts are. So here we have a couple of artifact repos that this lab knows about. So we have a public one. So we created a bunch of them, and actually it's open source. So I'd say almost half now of the artifacts that are publicly available have been contributed by the community. So we're doing some, and some people using labs now have been adding additional things, which is kind of great. So I'll go in the public repo. So what you do, you say, yeah, the repo's there, is a token to go get it, and so on and so forth. When it's yours, you just basically configure it once for the lab, and then we know how to get to the repo. But you need to, you know, give the rights to access to it. And then here, if you go to the repo itself, so directly there, we can jump on it. So for example, here we're in Git, and you have all the actually, we have a number of things there. We have scripts to create labs automatically. Labs themselves are defined by an ARM template, so you can have a template of labs, and you can create, you know, a new team comes in, you can spin up a lab by running a command. So that's also very interesting in the way to be able to service them. So if we look at the artifacts themselves, then basically we have all those the ones that we've published or customers have contributed. So for example, we're looking at, let's say, installing Fiddler. So here we have a little PowerShell that installs it from Chocolatey, and here we have a little JSON file that I'll just make it a little bigger. So it looks complicated, but it's not that complicated because I can understand it. So we're just saying, all right, so this is the schema. And we're just saying, all right, in the lab, what name do you want to see? What's the title? What publisher is there? What's the description you want to see in the blade when you pick it up? It appears under which search terms and under which OS, because we only show you the artifacts for the OS that you've picked. Here's the icon I want to see in the blade. The target OS, and then basically the PowerShell to go run to install it. And then the PowerShell you put in the same place. These you can fork and create your own. So what we see a lot of people is they take ours and then they fork it and then they add their own specific well-known location where they'll drop their bits. And they just add, you know, here's my executable, my PowerShell with it, and then, you know, pick up how you want it to appear, and then they're available in the lab. You can also create more than one. So you could have one for this team. They have their repo with the artifacts they use. That other team use different artifacts. We also see enterprise level artifacts. Like for example, for us across all the division, we have an artifact for authentication, two-factor authentication that the Windows guys wrote, so everybody's using them. So on and so forth. So you can share them. The idea is that one lab can point to multiple source repo, source control repo. And again, you control the source control repo. So for example, the central one, not everybody has access to, but you can make contribution to it. Well, again, it works well with those principles. So that answers the question properly. All right. Pardon me? So the question is, where do we have the credentials to run on PowerShell? So the service itself, we have a service principal that we use to go and work on the machine. So however, if you want us to go get something into a repo, that's why you need to go configure it to give us the rights to go on your behalf, basically. So that's the logic that we need to do in there. All right. So I'll continue with a couple more policy in there. Actually, another one that is fairly popular, I would say, or used quite a bit, is this idea of saying, all right, so I'm spinning all that stuff into a lab, so that's great. And what we allow you to do in there is really to track costs. So for the lab, you can see this is a cost we have. So in this case, we basically have you can set your lab as a monthly cost tracking or as since the creation of the lab, more project-based tracking. We have kind of both scenarios. But the key is in a monthly case, we just look at the spending we have and we project till the end of the month. And you can set threshold in there. So you see different threshold there at 50%, 75%, and 100%. And then from there, you can decide to have a notification that says, hey, you're basically reaching your limit or whatnot at every one of those. I'll just actually go to the target side of things. And then on the webhook, you can decide to send it to the dev guys, to the IT guys, or basically it's your choice where you send them. So for example, here we have a target cost, and it's monthly. And then we basically have the different notifications that we want to set, which URL we go to, which webhook, and basically whether or not we want to see them on the chart. So that kind of gives us a good sense. We do have requests to kind of federate that a little more, so that's work we're planning to do. Again, the key there is it works well with the idea of letting the dev team, you have an agreement, this is the cost envelope they should have. They have number of VMs, they can set their automation to shut down things and start them. They have the type of VM they can work with, they can create their templates. So the devs are kind of nicely equipped to do that. And from the dev perspective, to not have any account to deal with, and they can be left alone and do their thing and get their environment fast, they're going to keep, that's what we see, they keep under their agreed upon envelope, because they get environment in minutes instead of weeks. They just need to manage what they need and whatnot. So it creates a very nice collaboration between dev and IT. So it puts IT in a service provider and a good quality service in there. So for example, here we were looking at the trend, and actually we were hitting the target. So the next thing that we can do is actually look at, well, what are the details of what is spun up in this lab? So you can see who's spending what and so on and so forth, right? And then you can have the conversation. Now you're getting very specific. So I don't know what Azad is doing, but he's kind of being expensive this month. So actually, I know what he's doing. He's the guy running our data mart, so he's consuming quite a bit. But that's the idea, though. If you see anomalies or whatnot, you see where you're spending and whatnot. And then you can see often there's a correlation between spending and lack of auto shutdown, right? The automatic shutdown helps a lot in cost control. All right. So before I go into a lot of details on more networking and whatnot, I'll talk about the multi-VM environment and more complex environment. So I'll switch over to this guy here. All right. So the orange bar at the top means those are under a feature flag, and those are things that currently the team is working on. So there's risk that I get some trouble. So the idea here that you see what we're adding in there is the concept of environment. So I talked a lot about creating VM, having a dev box quickly, having a test box quickly. But now we're going into, I want to have multiple VMs. Like I want to have a larger environment in there. So the way to do that is with this idea of I'm going to go and create a larger environment. So when you create the environment itself, again, it's the same thing. You choose a base. The difference is we added, and I removed a bunch of things in this case. So I just kept these 3 guys from the marketplace. And these are actually 3 environments templates. So those are pure ARM template. Everybody knows what an ARM, who knows what an ARM template is? ARM, Azure Resource Manager template. Okay, so I'll take a minute to explain. So all of Azure, or I call it Azure V2, or the newer version of Azure is basically all based on resource and Azure Resource Manager template. So for example, lab itself, it's a resource. So you go and you create a lab resource. You create a VM resource. And all of those, you can actually define them into one file. There's one format to write all your everything you need into an environment. So your networks and your NICs and your disks and everything available under Azure is definable by an ARM template. So the idea is that, for example, when you pick a base and you add a bunch of software, actually what we're doing in the back end is we're composing based on your selection and ARM template. And then when you say create it, what we do is we take that ARM template, we throw it to Azure, or we call it the Azure front door. And then what Azure does, it looks at the ARM template and says, oh, you want a VM? I'm going to get the VM team or resource provider, spin up the VM, and with that, you need a NIC or a network. I'm going to send that to the network resource, and we'll spin that up. So that's kind of the old logic of Azure. Where it makes it very, very powerful and very interesting is that now you can define the whole environment with one file. So you can take one file, one source of truth, and say, all right, in this dev environment, I'm spinning up an environment based on this ARM template. I can take the same ARM template, create another environment, and in integration, in staging, and in prod. We also added a little earlier this year, actually doing reverse, pointing to a prod environment and say, give me the ARM template from that prod environment. Then I can take that ARM template, put it in source control, and then say, all right, let's spin up a dev environment using that ARM template. If you have a little more ARM skills, and ARM, by the way, you can define everything, so it's not the most easy thing. It's a big, big JSON. It composes very quickly. So what the practice is, people often have one, which is the environment, which points to all kinds of other ones. So you have one for this, you have one for that, and you kind of compose your ARM. And then you can go back in there and say, all right, in some of the ARM template, you can take some of the values and replace them or put them into a parameter file, where in prod, for example, you might need 27 server. In dev and test, you might say, well, I'm going to use 1 instead as part of the template, or let the user select whatever number he wants. So what we're doing here in the lab now, we're saying, well, that ARM template, we can take it as an entry point to go and spin up an environment. So whether, again, you compose it once, and then you add a couple of VMs together, you put them together and create a big ARM, or you compose one from scratch, or you copy one from our site. So from the Microsoft side, we have hundreds of them available. SharePoint Farm is for example, or like we have these, we took those from the public ARM templates that we have available. So basically, so you can go and pick which ARM template makes sense for your team, you elaborate it once, and then you just use it. So it makes it like a common one. So for example, this one is for an IaaS VM with a backend and a front end. This one is 3VM for a SharePoint farm. This one is a web app based on DocDB, which is kind of one of the Azure service for data. That's the one we use in our service, actually. But that's the idea. So it doesn't show a lot, but it's fundamentally very interesting, this idea that now you have a full environment description sitting in source control that both dev and IT can use throughout your different stages, and then size it to what you need. So from the lab, the idea is that, yeah, so now I can go and grab that. So I'll just pick this guy. And in there, basically, the template author was nice to us. Actually, it was shying. So we hard-coded a lot of things. Because we're in a lab, we know a lot of things. We know the lab and which storage it is. We know which account it is and whatnot. So So there's some facility to make it a little simpler for the users to go enter. So in this case, I'm giving my environment an environment name. So let's call it environment. I'll call it environment 4, so something different. Username. So that's the one I'll have on the VM there. A password in there. And then basically how many web servers I want. So let's all spin up 2 web servers with it. Let's help spin up 1 VS server. All right. My name is not good. All right, I'll cheat it. Man, I need to find better names. Or it might be a problem with it. Though I spun a few today. All right, so you get the idea. So you just fill the name, the environment name, and whatnot, and then pick your number of servers. And those are fields that are defined in the ARM template itself. So ARM is completely generic. You can decide what you want to have in there. So I won't spin this guy up, but I spun one up like earlier today, and again, it worked nicely, so okay. So then if you go to the environment, so that's one that's currently running. So I just clicked on it, and here basically I see the resource group that was that stuff for me. What was spawned with the ARM template? All right. English is my second language, so sometimes some words just don't want to go. Actually, it's not as bad as it used to be. I'll take a second. So the first few years I was doing conferences. I'm from Montreal, so I'm French-Canadian, so my language is French. So the H sound doesn't exist in French at all. So I was demoing to a crowd about this size, or an expense reporting software. So early in my career, I did expense reporting software for a while. And then at the end, I'm concluded. So with this software, you're gonna have a lot less assholes in accounting. So I have a co-presenter, and he's looking at me. He's going, "What?" I'm going, "Yeah, you're gonna have less assholes in accounting." And and everybody's like looking at me shocked. And he goes, "Hassles? You mean hassles?" I'm going, "Yeah, that's what I said." So that's where I learned that sound existed. I really got it. All right, so this has less hassles in IT. All right. So you see everything that you have there, and then you can go to more regular blades to go and connect to your VM and do whatever you want. So this is not shipped yet, so I'm under a feature flag. We think probably we're going to have it out later this week or next week. We run a very Kanban process. We ship changes to prod usually once a day, once every 2 days, sometimes 3 times in the day. We fix a bug. We're fully automated. So that's why I don't have we don't have a delivery schedule or whatnot. When it's ready, we push it, and then we send notifications. It's nice to be basically it's all microservices behind the scenes, so it makes it easy. All right, so that's kind of the new feature. And again, the way where to go and get them to appear in the list, I'll just go back. It's the same thing. So we go into our configuration. And now artifact repository is being called repositories because we have artifacts and environments now, or ARM template. So what we've added there is basically now you can say same information, and you can specify my artifacts go here, my Azure resource management template go there. And then from there, you're able to go and spin up full environment and again, point to the same logic, the environment at different levels of who can have access to it. Source control does a good job for that. We decided not to rebuild source control feature outside of source control. So you can, give reader access or authoring access. You can make them available. You can fork them, and so on and so forth. So and again, we like a lot what we see at customers, the ability to take submissions on them. So you can have the IT guys go and fix the networking side, and the dev guy go and add his artifact with his bits to deploy in the same template, and then you share it across. So there's really, really a real practical way to do that. Yes?
Is there an on-prem version of this software?
So question is there an on-prem version of this software? No, there's not. So it's fully aimed at Azure. However, and look, I did the H. I'm proud of myself. However, now I'm overdoing it. As Azure Stack come down, then that will become available. So we're not making labs on its own available, but Azure Stack is making ARM-based software like this available. So labs themselves, you can spin up with an ARM template, actually, as I mentioned. So once we have Azure Stack supporting all the stuff we use, all our dependencies, then we should be able to run on-prem in that context. So the when and how, that's I don't know. Like I know we're looking in probably somewhere spring or so next year. All right. So what I'll do is I'll swing and go into a slightly separate scenario and just talk a little bit about the training scenario. So that's another scenario that we've seen a lot. Yes.
How do you handle like a data refresh? So if you're bringing in a database server with that environment and it needs to be populated and received this data, how do you address that? Is that scriptable?
So that's a great question. So the question is, how do you handle a data refresh? So you create a new environment or a new VM, and you need to go and add the data to it. So we have two answers for that. Answer number one is, yes, it's scriptable. So that's why I was saying artifacts are a piece of software and or scripts you run on the VM. So that would be a case where you'd run a VM to generate your test data. The other feature I haven't shown, and I'll go back to it. If we go to a VM, and I'll go to the regular lab, is we have this concept of, actually we had that problem for us internally with test data and also large enlistments for the dev box. So in the dev box scenario, we create a VM base of everything you need in 5 minutes, and then you wait an hour to copy all the code you need on it to work on it. Remember, Visual Studio and Windows are fairly large pieces of code. So to solve that, and we have the same issue, again, test data and large enlistment with customers. So I'll just open this VM. So I'll go to my VM blade. And we have this concept of attached disk. So what you can do is actually add to the lab. I don't have any. Actually, I have one OS disk here. And then you can create data disk. Those will survive your VM. So you can create the data disk, load it once, and then when you delete the VM, we keep the data disk for it. So then when you create the next VM, you just reattach the disk and you're good to go. So the idea that then you can kind of persist your data on the cloud as opposed to recreate it and reloading it every time. If you want to, so that's for the recreate and whatnot. If you want to refresh it, then you can use a script or a combination of both. Maybe, when you take, often we see people taking here's the golden test data for the next week or month, and you just add it up, you add it as a disk, and those disks can be shared by the team. So you can set the disk, and then you can attach it to your VM. Different people can attach it to their VMs. So that's a problem. While I'm there, I'm going to go with, I want to talk a bit about the training scenario a little later. So I'll jump in there. We're kind of in the right blade already. One other thing we see for training also is the ability to say, I'm picking up a VM, I have a base, I'm adding a lot of things to it, but I don't want my students or my trainees to have to set up, pick artifacts and all of this. So one of the kind of feature we did almost at the beginning is this idea of, any VM. So I just here open my VM, and one of the things we have is actually just to create a custom image. So what that does is I give it a name and a description. And I can decide to sysprep it or not. If you sysprep it, actually, the username and password you have on the machine will be the same on the next one. So for training, if you sysprep them, then you just tell the user, all right, it's the connection to the VM when you get the first time is student, and here's the password, and then they can go and change it. But basically, it makes it very easy to start a class with people just creating a VM from an image where you put everything. We see people adding on the desktop, they add, let's say, documents, or in big letter, go to this place to have the course material or the exercise to go through and whatnot. So that's a kind of a very interesting scenario in that case. And it's basically pick a VM, install everything you need on it, set it up exactly as you want. You just go here, create custom image, and basically it's just add an image to the lab. And now it will be available for everybody as a base to start going. So if I go back, and did I just do that in my live system? Yes, I did. I can delete it later. So if I go and plus new VM, then now we should have a Cloud 99 now as an available option. So it becomes very easy to take a VM and say, all right, that's the right VM, let's keep it for the team to work on. So should be in there at some point. But that's the logic. Yes?
Related to that, is this scriptable? I'm thinking of a situation where I have that golden image for a third-party contractor, and I have
Right.
90 people, and I have about 90 VMs to give them access.
Right. So the question is this scriptable? I have that golden image I want to have a subcontractor with 90 people to use. Can I script that? So the answer is yes. And I'll give an example on how to do that. And actually kind of the principles. So, but yes, we have APIs and commandlets that let you do that. Also, what we've done is for integrating it into a pipeline. So we have the API, so you can do it from any tool. But for Visual Studio Release Management, we actually added tasks, extended VSTS, to have tasks to point directly to the lab. So in VSTS, you can basically add and go and say, create VM in this lab, and save the image in this lab, and so on and so forth. Actually, I can go in there right away. That's not what I wanted to do. That's what I wanted to do. Jumping a little bit over the place, but that's all good. So that's what I was actually mentioning here, this idea of, when you set up from VSTS, you can run a build, have your build create your VM, install everything you need on it, and then basically just call from VSTS build ORM the creation of your gold image. And actually, what we've done is, for a few large customers, is all the scripts you need to actually go and distribute them. So I'll just go over a bit of that principle here. We call it the image factory. We started a first blog, a first of a series. We're going to have a series of, I think it's 6 blogs that details all of this in detail. I cannot demo it because actually it's not shipped with the product. It's an example of a large customer using the product and going to it. And we work with them. We have a team internally who work with them to create that. So the principle is you start in the lab, and then you can use a formula in the lab or an image with all the artifact to create your initial image. And that image, the lab itself becomes a well-known location. So we know in the lab in which storage location that the images go. And then from there, on a schedule, we basically just start a build or a release management run that goes and creates the image, and actually what we're doing, so we create the golden image, check in the image definition. So what we've done is, in source control, we have a little JSON that says, this is this image, this is what it contains. We have two files that we're using in there, and we have a second one which comes to the next step. So once we have a new one, we update those images into the kind of the master. And then from them, we have a distribution that we do with release management, which takes those images and then pushes it to all the different labs. We're talking here the ability to send images to 5,000 or so users at the same time. So in the morning, you say, we're going to a new version of this layer or DOS. We're able to push 5,000 VMs like that morning by doing that distribution. And then basically what it does is in all the different labs, which are all in the different subscriptions, we can have multiple labs in the same subscription, but we go and we put kind of the image, and then from there, you could actually go and ask your script to pre-spin VMs, or just have them there available for the user to go plus new VM, and they create their new VM, and it's based on the latest image. So it's basically the same process we do internally for our latest version of Visual Studio, scaled up into a much larger context. So this is kind of a screenshot of actually their release process. So in there, in release management, anybody knows release management, Visual Studio release management? All right, okay. So basically what it does, you define stages, and then you can go from one stage to the other. So here you see, for example, the last 1 to 14 went all the way to all the labs, basically. And then you can track them, you have diagnostics and whatnot. So it's kind of the way to automate from dev to integration and whatnot. We're using it as part of the bakery. So the flow in there is really, we start a build agent, we create the VM, save the images in there, distribute the goal image, clean up the lab that we use to do that, clean up the older versions, and then we stop the build agent. So we started the next time we need to do an update. Either, I think for this scenario, they do it every week. Does that answer the question? Probably more than. All right. The last thing I wanted to talk a little bit was kind of the setup for, I started a little bit, but for training. So when we think about the training setup, and again, training, it's hackathon, it's sales force. We see also sales guy who need to demo software. They really like it. The devs say, here's a VM with everything you need. You just need to click there and it's going to run for you. So the idea in that context, what you want to do is limit the choices. You want to be in a context where you show less. So the person preps the lab and then just picks the sys-prepped images, and that's pretty much all the student can go and use. We have also other case, and I'll show an example from internal, where you can actually have people skip Azure altogether and go from a website that just basically calls the lab behind the scenes, creates the VM and whatnot, gives them an RDP file, and then they connect to the RDP file. So that actually the users don't even see the lab or all of that. We work very hard on the UI, but if it makes more sense to just skip it, you can do that as well. So for example, the internal case is actually our hackathon when we look at it. So we have this hackathon every year. We have a week where a number of teams, 16,000 people try to do all kinds of new things for a week, and it's kind of very interesting. And there, under the resources, basically we want a team that says, all right, I'm going to try a band extension for some reason. So they need to set up environment for that. So what the hackathon teams is, they predefine images and that the people will need. And the customer for there, our users should just go in there. And basically they go there and they call it the garage sandbox. So it's the garage who manages that. And then from there, they can go and just connect to the Garage Labs. So I'll just authenticate. And when I get in there, I get into a blade. In this case, they haven't skipped it completely. All right. And basically what we do is we have a bunch of labs. So you get assigned to a lab, you get thrown to a lab. Every time you come back, you go to the same thing. Again, all through the API. And when you get there, you have basically the choices you have. You're limited in the number of things that you can do in there. And I'll show so for example, I don't have a VM yet, but I can go and create the VM, and then I have a couple of images that I can pick from, which have, what was on the website, what's available, and so on and so forth. So we have these three to start from. And then the rest is standard. The key here that I haven't shown is in configuration, you can pick what people can see or not. So we have this idea of we show all the marketplace image. So in this hackathon or in training scenario, you might not want student to be able to go pick anything on the marketplace. So again, you can go, in this case, we say, allow marketplace. You can pick some of them, all of them, or none of them. In this case, Ubuntu is the only one available. And then we have two Windows, one which has Visual Studio and all our tools together, so that you don't need to think too much about it. So that, again, that's a way to restrain it, so that you can have for the team. We see dev teams also use that, because you know what, when you want to create a VM, and these are the 3 or 4 your team use, or the 7 or 8, you don't want to see all the others, right? It's just distraction in the creation of your VMs. Same thing with the custom images. So custom image, we have scripts, and in there, so I showed a way to create a custom image, which was very simple. You set up your VM, and then you go on the VM, save as image, give it a name, and you're done. However, we also have the ability to upload an existing image. So if you have images on-prem, you can actually extract the VHD, upload the VHD of the VM to Azure, and then it's available here to be used directly. Or if you have some VMs that you created on Azure outside of labs, you want to bring them to the lab, you can take the image, bring them then, and recreate them. We're going to add a little later the ability to move the VM altogether, but right now we've been doing to the images. And again, the mindset in dev and test on the cloud is destroy and recreate more than keep everything that you have all the time. And then we have the formulas, which is basically the idea. I don't have any in there, but the formula is really the base plus all your artifacts plus all the answers you've done for the artifacts that you keep. So the formula is really all the team preference for these answers. If you install this third-party software and you need to put, where to get them and how to install them. The last thing I think I'll show, and then I'll turn it just for questions. Actually, I could go on this guy. Is something also that comes up on occasion is this idea of secret store. So what we do is we spin up an Azure secret, Azure Vault behind for you in the lab, and so that you're able to give once a name for something, let's say password or connection string or whatnot. You give it a common name on the right, and that's that common name you type in artifacts or in your ARM templates. So that basically you don't have to have any secrets in the clear or in your config files or whatnot. So that's just a standard key vault, Azure Key Vault that we spin up and that we use on your behalf basically in the lab to deal with secrets. What we do not have so those are secrets for you individually. We're going to add team level secrets. So that's something that's been asked. Questions? No? I'll just finish with one thing maybe before I turn it around of what we're doing next. So I'll go over those quickly. This is what we've done since the last time, but since not a lot of people have seen it before, kind of showed a bit of everything. So the next thing we're doing is when you spin up a multi-VM from an ARM template, right now with a bunch of VM and other things, we track the cost on them. We'll shut down the VM with the shutdown policies. We'll limit the number of VMs you have in the ARM template based on the VM policy. But we don't, in our code, we don't understand other Azure objects, so we need to finish that. So for example, you don't shut down a SQL Azure database. You might resize it down. So for us, there's a higher level concept, which is on the schedule or on when you're not using it, please make it cost the least possible. So we need to go figure what that means, you know, or implement what that means for SQL and batch and websites and so on and so forth. So our goal over the next weeks and months is to understand how to stop them in a way, or to pause them in a way to save money when you don't need them. That's what's very different in dev test than in prod. In dev test, nobody's there, you don't want to pay for it. So that's where there's, when you think about it, you know, 24/7 versus 40 hours a week, it's a big difference. Same thing for build agents and test agent. I mean, it makes a significant difference. So that's kind of the next step for us. Already, when we're going to ship later this week, the cost tracking is already included. So what we're missing is really just the policy. One thing that I can't wait for us to have is the claim process, where you can, from an API or manually, create VMs, and then we're going to have my VMs, and then we're going to have team VMs that I can go and claim, so that you can spin them up ahead of time in case of. So that's the fastest way to get one. You just need to wake it up. You don't need to create it in the morning or whatnot. So it's a good way to distribute VM. We think claiming is more interesting. You don't need to maintain a list of who gets which VM or whatnot. You just create a bunch of VM where we've been using it internally for a little while, and people just go and pick a VM, and then they make it their own, and then they work on it. We will have the share back again, so I can take my VM and give it to somebody else to go run test on it. So that's kind of the feature we want to add in there. Team secrets I just talked about. Artifact diagnostics, so we want to do a little better. We write a lot of artifacts, so that's my developers kind of, you know, do a better job when the artifacts breaks or you add a new artifacts, it doesn't work. Like it's fairly hard to do a diagnostic when you're an artifact author. So we want to make artifact authoring better. And then second disk improvement. So there's a number of improvement on second disk that we can do to better view them, share them, store them, maybe store them in a cheaper storage and things of that nature. So I'll turn it over to questions. You can find it, actually, you can just, you know, search Azure DevTest Labs and you'll find our main page. All our documentation is there. There's a free trial on it, so you can create a free Azure account. You can try it. The service is free, so there's no cost. Basically, we're trying to help dev and test use Azure, and basically we monetize on the Azure tasks, Azure spending that customers do. So there's no additional fee for the lab per se. And I will ask you guys to do evaluation, if that would be actually very appreciated. And I'll just open it up for questions. All right, thanks. Yes? The mic might work.
So I'm a little confused with the best use case for Dev Test Lab. Today we create our VMs in Azure platform using subscriptions.
Okay.
So we have prod, QA, dev subscriptions.
Right.
And our scripts are identical.
Right.
And the way we do release management, build management, they're all totally identical.
Right.
So why would I want to create my dev test or dev VMs in the dev labs? So
it's a good question. You can create them in regular Azure. Why would I do those? If you want to have it's more about the policies. If you want in the dev environment to have them shut down automatically at night, the lab will give you that. If you want to give devs direct access so that it's simple for them, this team, they get in their lab and they see the 1 or 2 dev environment that they need. So that's the reason. When you think about it, the lab gives you policies, procedure, ease of recreating them also. So your pipeline might create them. You might have the template and have a dev or a tester create another environment to do some investigation. So those are the scenarios. So it's really, if there's value in sharing, is there value in the cost tracking of those environments, which is hard to do in generic Azure. And if you want to have those policy max number of things in there and your automation, like shut down overnight.
So with that, can I still keep my
RM. So
yeah, RM, but more importantly, build management, release management, same.
exactly the same. It's
Okay.
just instead of using the task deployed to Azure, you use the task deployed to lab in Azure.
Okay.
And actually deploy to Azure, you could also use to deploy to the lab, but we made one specific so you enter you have less parameters to enter.
Okay. So I can keep my dev VMs in the dev lab, but QA and staging.
Stage and
In the-
prod,
in the
I wouldn't
separately.
do in labs.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly, that's, and now if you define them in ARM templates, it makes it like a very nice, really nice flow, right?
So
Yeah.
how can you handle Active Directory domain membership for the VMs? Is it not recommended to do that when you're for the isolated VMs and actually looking forward to the environmental groups of VMs? Is it
So I'm going to try to answer what I think. So in the lab, and I did not cover that actually, but in the lab, we use AAD to access the lab. So if you want to use AAD groups, you can say in the lab, you have a section where you add users or groups that have access to the lab, and that's based on AAD.
and our app has dependencies on local AD, so that's what I'm curious. Do you bundle in a domain controller with each environment that you deploy, or can you have centralized AD services and kind of join them to the domain as you deploy?
I don't know specifically, but we have customers, and even for us, you might have seen, we have a join domain artifacts, and so
Okay.
people will go and run a script to
Kinda
join
like
the
custom
domain.
script, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Well, I'll stick around anyhow. Your questions, all right. Yeah, yeah. So that is done through an artifact. If you use actually if you use express route also, then actually the whole lab is connected to your domain. So if you create a VNet which is express route enabled, then you when you configure the lab, you say this lab's using this VNet, then every machine is connected to your domain at creation. So in that case, that makes it fairly simple. I'd say it's very common with larger companies.